So we want to record this tonight because there's so much rich, good information, and also because we hope that you will enjoy this webinar and you will consider sharing it with other people once we have it up on YouTube. So welcome tonight to the webinar with Broken Promises, the hidden North Carolina teacher tax. I think that just to give you a little bit of background, about a decade ago, the legislature basically took a shredder to teacher pay, eliminating salary boosts for longevity and for getting advanced degrees. They front-loaded pay scales so that teachers with the most experience got the smallest pay increases. Along with it, legislators abolished tenure, established caps on class size, and increased teaching workloads. So from my point of view, this began choking of the pipeline for bringing new teachers into the classroom and by abolishing the nationally recognized Teaching Fellows program that fed more than 8,500 college graduates into schools in every county, with 80% of those remaining in the classroom at least a year later, and beyond the 4-year commitment that they made. Now, all of this has come home to roost as school systems throughout North Carolina, urban and rural, are seeing severe teaching vacancies. And much of this is tied to teacher pay and teacher benefits and the loss of some of the things I just mentioned a few minutes ago. A month ago, the State Department of Public Instruction reported that classroom vacancies had jumped by more than 50%. Two rural counties, Halifax and Hope counties, both reported teacher vacancies at nearly 25%. So tonight, I saw a presentation, a website actually, that Kim Mackey and Derek Scott, who are with us here tonight, we can advance the slide. I want to first welcome, you may have heard them speak on the radio and on different outlets they've been on. I'm really proud and to recognize Kim Mackey. Kim has taught social studies for 18 years, the last 16 of those in North Carolina. Her advocacy efforts are motivated by the desire to ensure support for a strong public school system for her students, but also for her own 2 children. And please try to, later we'll repeat this again, but follow her on her blog, Educated Policy. I'll have to put that in the chat later, Kim. Also joining us tonight, Derek Scott. Derek Scott is a Wake Forest-based computer programmer who has been working on data-driven advocacy for public education and teacher pay since 2017. His analysis can be found on Medium, Politics NC, and Twitter. His wife, Heather, served on the Wake County Board of Education from 2018 to 2022, and he also is a father of 2 children. So these folks have a real interest not only in our community and the profession of teaching, but they also have their own children involved. So Kim, I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us a little bit about how you and Derek have been approaching your look at teacher pay.
Yeah, thanks, Yvonne, and thanks to everyone joining us tonight, whether you're a fellow teacher or parent or just someone who cares about public schools as really the basis of how we protect our democracy. So I'll give a little bit of an introduction to help catch folks up to speed. So the methods that we used really, like, it's addition and it's multiplication and it's public information. Now the formulas get more complex, but that's really, it's addition and multiplication. So what Derek and I have been doing for a couple of years now is we would look back at the salary schedules that are published in the state budget every year. So it's public information, and combine it with the inflation calculator. So I'll show that in a little bit. the specific tool put out by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, where you could say if this much money, if you had this much money in this year, how much is the equivalent purchasing power later on? And the reason why it's important to adjust for inflation is that's how we have honest conversations about money over time, because the whole point of money is to be able to buy things. So when we look at salaries today, or even what you think you might potentially make, we're thinking about the amount of things that we could put in our cart if we made that much today, and envision that's what we could make in the future with having that amount in our cart. So that's the role that inflation plays, is you have to adjust for it when you're comparing money over time. Not doing so is a means of deception. And failure to adjust for inflation is actually something that's one of like 30 different deception points that I teach in my own classroom with students, of how do you notice the more subtle ways that folks may be potentially misleading you. And that's one of the things that we'll highlight today, is that failure to adjust for inflation is why we have some of these dominant narratives that don't reflect folks' actual livelihoods and what they're seeing in their own pocketbooks. So that's basically what we did, was just take those salary schedules, adjust them for inflation, and say what the equivalent purchasing power is. And that's how we're able to compare a salary schedule in 2007, 2008, and what that would look like in a year like 2023. So this is the inflation calculator. As I said, it's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and near the end here, I can share with folks a link to that if they're interested. When I'm in my classroom with students, I show them this site when we're learning about macroeconomics and inflation, and they get to play around with it too. So this shows, for example, what I thought I would be making on step 16 when I looked at step 16 when I first came to North Carolina in 2007, 2008. I thought in 2007, 2008, I would be earning $41,840 worth of stuff that I could put in my cart. In order to put the same amount in my cart in now 2023, I would need to be making $60,739. So if all we did was take that salary schedule and adjust it for inflation each year to preserve that purchasing power, that's how much I thought I would be making. And we'll get to later why it's not $60,000. All right, so next, there's a video here, which really shows the devolution of North Carolina teacher pay. And I'm going to play that video for you. It doesn't have every single year. I kept it simple for this first part to help highlight just some key years as part of that history. So I'll go ahead and show you what the teacher salary schedule actually looks like when we're making an apples to apples comparison across time. So it starts off here in 2007, 2008, which happens to be the high watermark for purchasing power based on the salary schedules Derek and I had looked through. It was the strongest purchasing power. And it also happens to be the same year I joined North Carolina. So when I moved to North Carolina after teaching 2 years in another state, I was looking at the schedule saying, okay, well, you know, I'll make back what I was making in this other state in 2 years. And it took many more years than that because of what you'll see has happened to that schedule. We'll stop it there. Oops. And I'm going to go to the next slide here where we can see, oops. So this is, instead of showing them one at a time, it shows all of them. So this blue line at the top was 2007, 2008. That was the peak of purchasing power. We had no issues recruiting and retaining teachers then. And I know this because I went to the job fairs in 2006 and 2007. It was busting at the seams. I was flying from out of state to come and attend these job fairs. And even despite having a master's degree in secondary education, a bachelor's degree in history, as well as in political science, and 2 years of teaching experience, it still took me over 6 months to find a teaching position in North Carolina. We did a great job recruiting and retaining folks when someone with my credentials was having a hard time. And when I looked around, they were busting at the seams. There were a lot of people who wanted to teach in North Carolina when we had a salary schedule that looked like that blue line. Where we are now is that white line. It's one of the lowest watermarks. It's really competing with that 2013-14 schedule. So our current schedule is a little better for beginning teachers. But as you can see, as folks increase with experience, then they have that bigger gap. So it's a close tie between 2013 and 2022. But the main point is this really debunks a lot of what we're hearing with, well, we've given raises. Why do they keep asking for more? Well, because whether inflation was 8% like it was last year, or 1% when it was for much of my career, our state failed to maintain the purchasing power. And as we're asserting, really failed to maintain that promise of what folks were predicting they'd be able to put in their cart when they became teachers in North Carolina. Another line that I want to bring to your attention is that yellow one. So you can see in 2014, it turns into these steps. So they created in that year these quinquennial pay freezes where everyone in the same 5 years was making the same amount. And I'm referring to that specifically because I've also been doing a lot of work with some of the ways the state is proposing changing licensure and pay. And when I saw that plan within the last year originally started out where folks in different licenses were all going to make the same pay, I'm a history teacher. I'm like, wait a minute, we've been here before. 2014, 2015 was when they were trying to institute a very similar model. The other line here I wanted to bring your attention to is the one in orange. So when we go from the line in blue to the line in orange, that's where we see the impact of the Great Recession on the teacher's salary schedule. And no one is denying that the Great Recession had an impact, and that's why we walked it back. I had students whose parents were losing their jobs, so I understood it was important to be happy that I still had mine. But when we go from the blue to the orange, and we look at all these other years, we're not in the Great Recession, and yet we're doing worse with our offers to try to recruit and retain teachers. So this concept that because the numbers nominally were increasing a little bit each year, the purchasing power was declining each year. And that really speaks to where teachers were saying, well, it's if I'm putting less in my cart, whether it's 1% inflation or 8% inflation, than I could the year before. It doesn't matter that the headline is it's a 1.5% raise. They're not feeling that. They're able to put less in their cart. So for this video here, I'm just going to play what every single line looks like. And it looks like one of those hurricane spaghetti maps. So this is why I'm showing you second, now that you had a little bit of an introduction, seeing a couple of years at a time. But try to notice how we go down, we creep back up a tiny bit, and we go back down again. That's the trend that this animation shows. So this is the end screen there, and you'll notice if you look at the key at the bottom, I do have the current budget proposals, but I'll circle back to that in just a moment. But the main thing that we have noticed for years and have been trying to amplify, and that was part of why we created that website, was we knew we needed to do a better job trying to message it, because we had been working on that for a while. So I'm going to turn it over to Derek.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, we were, Kim reached out to me. We were trying to talk about, how do we get the word out? And we've both been working at it in our own ways for a long time. About this website I'm about to tell you about is the fruition of that effort. This slide is really just a warm up here. One of the things that I'm going to keep referring to is I want to compare our data to your lived experience to the narratives that run around about teacher pay in the discourse, and a recurring one is every couple of years, like clockwork, there's word out that we're raising teacher pay faster than anywhere else, or faster than ever before, or some combination of both. On the right is a really simple graph. It just reaches in and grabs all the average teacher pay numbers out of the highlights of the North Carolina public school budget that's published by DPI every year. A new one popped last month. And as you can see, we have not returned to the purchasing power offered by the state in 2011, which was the last budget written before the balance of power shifted in the legislature. So we can go on to the next slide there. And so I'm going to get to the website in a minute, but just to frame what we're doing, we're going to compare year by year. The salary schedules that Kim's been showing you have been adjusted for inflation from beginning to end, but that's not how careers run. Careers run a year at a time. But what if we just took a good salary schedule and just said, well, we don't need to reinvent the wheel every year. Let's just adjust it for inflation every year. We'll include longevity, so it's apples to apples with what was done in the past, if it was paid. I do want to touch on some limitations of this analysis. It doesn't include masters or nationally board certified teacher pay. Masters, those actually would make this look worse. If you have one or more of those, then your tax will be more than is shown by the website, because they're defined percentages of the base pay. If your base pay is lower, your bonus is lower, your supplement is lower, it cascades. We didn't include one-time bonuses or incentive bonuses. Those are harder to track and don't represent a really enduring investment. And frankly, once you see the scale of the numbers we're talking about, it doesn't really amount to enough to make much difference. And the last thing that actually does kind of make a fair bit of difference, I did account for it in the previous graph, but the recent state funding for local supplements goes into 96 counties. It was $100 million last year. It's $170 million this year, and they're planning $70 million more for next year in the budget. That's real money. Real people receive it, but it doesn't hit everybody the same. I would basically have to get the district you work for in order to calculate it as part of this analysis, and not for nothing. 27% of teachers live in the 4 counties that aren't included. And only about 91% of the allotment was spent, and we have no idea how much of it is going to end up being spent this year. So we left it out of the analysis. So this is a little, like I said, this is a little bit more fiddly than what Kim was showing you before. We're going to take the salary schedule and we're going to adjust it for inflation year by year, and then compare it to the nominal dollars salary that's provided to that step of experience by the year's salary. So we compare the 2008 year 2 salary adjusted to $2009, compare it to the year 2 salary for 2009. Year 3 salary adjusted to $2010, compare it to the 2010 year 3 salary, etc. And that'll explain why the shape is just a little bit different on some of these graphs. But it also means that the differences that we're about to calculate are in nominal dollars. That's essentially what would have been received. And so this is the first screen that you come to in the app on the website, and it shows the black line is the original pay schedule. I picked 2008 as the start year. If you didn't start in 2008, you can compare it to the best salary schedule with a button on the website, so that's handy. And you can see, where raises were basically step raises were basically shifted out by the Great Recession, and then and then for a while in preparation for the big tax cut that happened here. There are a couple of things that you can see on here that I think are pretty illustrative. This bump here, that is the Tillis for Senate bump. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, that first bump at 2015, that's the Tillis for Senate bump. That's what he ran on as being a world-class teacher raise. And as you can see, basically it cashed in, years of not giving any raises before. Then there's another one, 2019, which was a campaign point in the 2018 elections. And again, got up there, but not all the way back to where we were. And in the meantime, the red area is what people were left with missing out on. Go on to the next slide. And this takes that graph and shows it as a table. Again, the differences are in what we call nominal dollars. It would have been $940, $2009. I need my glasses. Sorry, I'm trying to go without them. I can't. $925, $2010, and so on. The reason I mention that is that again, this total is underrepresented in terms of present value. We're adding together nominal dollars from multiple years. The actual present value of the difference is greater than this by about $11,000, if I remember right. But the idea here, the reason for this methodology is to give people these are recognizable amounts in the received area. Therefore, the difference, is adjusted to the same year's dollars. The difference is essentially, money that would have been in your pocket at that time. So that's the reason for doing it that way. And we can go on to the next. And so another option at the top of the screen is to include the rest of a 30-year career at the, but the received numbers are on the 2023 pay schedule, and still comparing to the 2008 pay schedule as the black line along the top. And you can see here where the red area just starts to just get really insane. And this is a huge problem. I think this is a huge problem for the state. I think this is extremely short-sighted. It's important because it's actually a talking point in some of the teacher pay proposals right now. There are those who say that we take too long to get teachers to their maximum pay. We ask them to live too long on what is effectively less than a living wage. And both of those things are true. But what you can see from this analysis and from Kim's salary schedules adjusted for inflation as well, is that the new proposals don't front load the salary schedule, they just chop off the end of it. They're asking teachers, their proposal is for teachers, they'll barely restore past standards of living for newer teachers. And then they're going to sort of dramatically and permanently, if they get their way, lowered standard of living for experienced and, importantly, retired teachers as well. Retirement salary is based on your highest earned working salary. It's one of the biggest reasons to keep those end of career numbers down. It saves money not just while you're working, but after you've retired. But it saves money for the state. It keeps money out of the pockets of hardworking teachers. And I think that this is one of the biggest things that's driving people just looking around and not thinking maybe if they're going to go to college and go into debt to do it, that teaching might not be the best way to get, everything they can out of that investment. And it's a shame. And one more time, on the next slide, we'll have the same data as a table, so you can see the actual numbers. And I just showed the bottom of it. And again, the differences are in nominal dollars. But the ones at the end are all 2023 dollars. And man, it adds up. That's retirement savings. Those are homes people can't buy in places where they're getting increasingly expensive. There's a dramatic graph in the Best MC report that I didn't want to just copy paste into here, that shows essentially that the current salary schedule basically it gets teachers to a living wage for a family of 4 by year 15 or 16, and then just leaves them there. That's the maximum, where they max out their salary. So we're while on one hand we're fighting for a living minimum wage for people at the absolute bottom of the pay scale for all careers. The state is essentially saying that it's good enough to give teachers a barely living maximum wage over the course of their entire career. We can go on. I want to say something about the teacher pipeline. We can go back up one more. There we go. Back up. Those graphs. It should be just one. Yeah, that one right there. There we go. This is older data, which is important to keep this stuff around. I found this in a Public Schools First NC fact sheet. And the reason it's important to keep older data around is that the people who maintain these websites are not always super invested in making sure you have access to it forever. If you go to the same place and look for the same data, it only goes back to 2013. And so it's necessary to, they don't quite agree exactly for reasons that I couldn't completely ascertain. But if we click one more down, I went and got the rest of this from the updated website. There'll be a link in a resources page if you want to get the slides later. Basically, everywhere I went for data is listed. But you can see it went down, and then it's saying similarly overlapping down, and then I guess down more slowly but still down. I think there were a lot of people who thought that the teacher pipeline would perk back up after the recession. The recession put money in front of a lot of people, in the forefront of a lot of people's minds. I think that a lot of people had hoped that interest in teaching would come back up. And I feel that, right around here when the state went all in on shutting down the top end of the pay scale for experienced teachers, you can just see that it never came back. And if you go, in fairness, if you go to the NCDPI website and you look at the teacher pipeline data there, they will show you a teacher pipeline that is increasing the last 3 or 4 years, and that is almost exclusively because of alternate entry pathways, not the traditional pathway through ed majors in the UNC system. Homegrown, essentially kids who chose to invest their careers as teachers. and I welcome folks into the profession because my kids both lost teachers this year during the year. I'm looking for teachers who want to be there anywhere we can find them. But at the same time, I think that if you're looking to the alternate pathways for solace against this data, that it's probably not a great sign. And with that, I think that's everything I had prepared, and I'm going to kick it back to Kim to talk about the budget proposals that came out this year.
Yeah, thanks, Derek, for sharing about that, because you're right. There is this narrative that somehow, because we have a person there, we also need to ask the follow-up question of, are they prepared and are they ready? I have 2 kids in elementary school. They deserve someone who's ready to lead kids, not just someone who knows content or not just someone who has an interest. So, we need to make sure we're prioritizing the key ingredient, that they understand kids and not just like kids, if you're going to be responsible for leading them. All right, so we got another graph here. So to try to bring it up to today, we've been focused a lot on the history and debunking the false narratives about what has been happening to teacher pay. And I also appreciate Derek bringing in the research on what has been happening to the pipeline with who's coming in and to what extent are they prepared to lead that classroom on day one. So this graph here, we have the 2007, 2008, which is in the green, and we continue to use that as a point of reference, not just because it was the high water mark, not just because it happens to be the year that I came in, but that was as North Carolina was making improvements in its salary schedule, especially after the second Leandro case was decided in 2004. This was realistic. What we see with that white line, that's where we are right now. And when you look at that white line, you can really see why our pipeline is broken. They literally broke the salary schedule. It used to be on this incline, and now they don't want teachers like me to stick around. That's what I look at when I see this. I've been 18 years in teaching, but because of a couple part-time things earlier in my career, I'm on step 16. And what this schedule says to me is, thank you, Mrs. Mackey, for your service to North Carolina classrooms, but you're frozen where you are. We don't want to pay you more. And that, if we're talking just in terms of economics and price signals, the price signal we're sending is we don't want experienced teachers. And I can assure you that having taught for 18 years, I am a much better teacher this year than I was my first or second year, or even my 8th year, because just like I expect my students to always improve, I expect the same of myself. So this notion that somehow folks like me are done having something to offer is just completely nonsensical. But for the reasons Derek shared, it's one way for them to save a lot of money by imposing the largest teacher taxes on those experienced teachers. It's not just about that annual pay that maybe they can send to tax breaks for corporations or lowering income taxes for the wealthy. But it also decreases the retirement calculation since it goes based on your highest years. So we've got that green line and white line that we've seen, bringing it up to today. So Governor Cooper, the governor typically offers their first proposal for a budget. So put that on the graph for what would the teacher salary schedule look like next year if Governor Cooper's proposal was adopted. One of the responses to Governor Cooper's proposal was that it was unrealistic, but the math does not back that up, that it's unrealistic, because realistically in 2007, 2008, we paid people on that green line. Also, when you look at Governor Cooper's proposal, it's very similar to the schedule that was offered in 2017 and that purchasing power. So did we not actually pay people on that schedule with that purchasing power in 2017? It overlaps fairly closely with that line. So this notion that somehow it was unrealistic just does not reflect a recognition of how money and purchasing power works. And that's really one of the things that we're trying to debunk. We understand, maybe not everyone's not up to speed on macroeconomics. That's my job, is to teach kids and get them to understand that, and that's fine. But when we have folks who are in charge of our state budget who are saying things that are inaccurate, there's only two reasons for it. One reason is they just don't understand it. So there's the level of ignorance of fiscal policy and monetary policy and inflation. So there could be that element of ignorance. If it's not ignorance, that only leaves one other bucket, and that bucket is malice. And really the work that Derek and I are doing, we're trying to eliminate ignorance as a possibility. So maybe some folks really sincerely didn't realize what was happening. Well, now that they know better, we're certainly hoping that they do better, particularly when there's an apparent $3 billion surplus that was built on the backpacks of students by denying them the teachers that they deserve and that we used to offer to students a generation ago. So the House proposal, you can see, and they're doing an awful lot of fuzzy math. I mean, everything I do and Derek does, like, we show you our work. Unfortunately, there's a lot of folks with titles and platforms that are making claims. It would be great for them to show their work, just as Derek and I have done. But we're hearing a lot of claims about, how the House budget proposal is quite generous. When you graph it, it's moving the needle some, right? But let's not go back to 2019 with this notion of something's better than nothing. We need to do more than just a token raise if we're serious about recruiting and retaining teachers in our state. So the third line that you'll see in the key only is the Senate. In the next month or so, the Senate will release their proposed budget. Within that budget is also their proposal for the teacher salary schedule. So we don't yet know what that line looks like. It would be fantastic if the Senate were to, when I graph this again, I would love to be able to graph that yellow line much closer to that green line, especially if we're sitting on a $3 billion surplus, which, as you can see, it was in part things like the teacher tax that helped to pay for that. And it's not just teachers that are facing that, other state employees are as well. So whenever our state leaders talk about the surplus, we always need to ask the follow-up question of, well, how did we get that extra money? They'll say it's because they're taxing too much. Our work is proving that they're just shortchanging folks that they're supposed to be working to support. So in addition to those graphs, to put it into real numbers, I have these charts, and I'll just kind of leave that up and zoom it in a little bit more here. So again, for example, I'm on step 16. So my state base salary, and yes, I get a local supplement, and yes, I'm grandfathered into master's degree pay, and yes, I get national board certification. But all those things are connected to that base as well. So all those supplements increase when that base increases. Now, if I had moved to North Carolina just a few years after the time that I did, I would not have gotten master's degree pay. And that's what a lot of folks are facing. The House has introduced reinstating that, but that's something else that we're looking for. So the point Derek and I have been trying to make is, if we were to look just at that green and restore 2007, 2008, my teacher tax for this year alone was just over $8,000. The purchasing power I signed up for when I joined in 2007, 2008, I'm envisioning at step 16, I can put $60,000 worth of stuff in my cart. And that's not what ended up happening. I can put $8,000 less than what I pictured I would have been able to purchase at that time. So this year alone, my teacher tax is $8,000. Overall, my teacher tax is over $84,148. Folks like me have worked over a year for free in North Carolina, but plenty of folks who I know, I have a lot of former colleagues who saw what was happening and they left. And I don't blame them, but I certainly hate it for my kids who I would have loved to have had in their classrooms as well. The other trend that I'm noticing we're seeing more of is folks aren't waiting for the end of the school year to leave and go somewhere else. We have a lot of mid-year vacancies, which Derek has mentioned both of his kids have experienced as well. And someone's filling in there, right? But it doesn't mean that they are a fully credentialed, prepared teacher ready to lead learning. So we need to focus on retaining folks and not just recruiting them as well. So to bring back that inflation calculator, so what I envisioned, my salary schedule in 2007 said, Kim, on step 16, in 2007, picture $41,840 worth of stuff in your cart. And now I'm on step 16, and it's not what I thought would be in my cart. I would need to make just over $60,000 to put that same amount. So that's what we're saying with adjusting. It's that purchasing power that needs to be preserved. Okay. So we're not here just to, throw rocks at what has happened or focus on dwelling on the past. But as a social studies history teacher, the whole point why we look into the past is to guide what we should do next. So here's what we think we should do next. If we want to restore the North Carolina teacher pipeline, we have to restore the salary power that existed when we did not have a pipeline problem. So if we were to restore the 2007-2008 salary schedule purchasing power, which was that green line and that green column all along, so it would be fantastic if when I graph that Senate proposal, that if it were at that green line, I'll take down the teacher tax site, right? We've closed that gap. There's no tax moving forward. And yes, I would love the state to cut me a check for the over $84,000 it has shortchanged me. That would have gone towards saving for my kids' college education. I wouldn't have had to take out a home equity loan to replace my 20-year deck and do some other home improvements, right? I'm not asking for them to cut me that check and make up for those losses. What I'm saying is we cannot keep teachers in the classroom if they know they're signing up for a teacher tax, if they can't trust that what they're signing up for is what will be fulfilled. So after we restore that salary schedule, we need to take the politics and the folks who don't quite understand perhaps how purchasing power works out of the equation. And we need to take that schedule and adjust it annually, automatically, by doing one of two things. Either we can index it to inflation. So if inflation were to be 1.1% as it was for much of my career, then we adjust that whole schedule by 1.1% that next year. And if we have 3% inflation, then we adjust it by 3% inflation. We could even make it more simple. The international inflation target is 2%. And when I looked back at the inflation data from 2007 to now and took the average, it was just a little above 2%. It was like 2.1%. If we were to just say, we're not even going to index it to inflation because that makes it hard to predict future budgets with what it would look like if we're responding and being reactive instead of proactive. So let's be proactive. Let's adjust it 2% each year. And some years inflation may meet that target. That's the target. That's what globally, when we're talking monetary policy, countries try to peg their currency at that 2%, because if you can predict it, you can plan for it. So if we were to peg it to 2%, then in some years, the teachers may make out a little better if inflation was actually 1.1%. Or if inflation happens to be something like 5%, they may not make out quite as well that year, just like other people experience that same thing. But that 2% would make it predictable for budgets moving forward if that's what they're looking for. And that seems to be what they're looking for when they plateau pay for 10 years for folks like me who are in that 16 to 24 year mark. So that preference for predictability could be also applied here. So by doing this, it would depoliticize the salary schedule, that we're not, having these partisan arguments or who's in power is going to dictate what the schedule is based on their commitment to public schools and the students who they serve. It also prevents the bait and switch that we've experienced. That's how the teacher tax has been created. There's only, as I believe, 1 year for that Derek and I found, and that was for folks who signed up in like 2013, 2014. They have made out better, but they also signed up at the low watermark. So the only place there really was to go was up there. Every other teacher in the last like 15 years has lost out. So we're not going to be able to recruit and retain folks if we are not honoring, if we're breaking the promise of here's the salary schedule when you choose to become a teacher or when you choose to actually join a classroom. That bait and switch is not going to be a way that we're going to recruit and attract folks into the profession. And by doing that, it would end the NC teacher tax moving forward. That's the goal. That's why we're publishing this site, not to complain that the teacher tax exists, but to say we better do something about it if we're serious about restoring the teacher pipeline.
Okay. Excellent, Kim and Derek. I know you're showing now the resources. I want to tell everybody not to worry about this too much. Everyone who registered for the workshop, these links will be included in a thank you email. So let's just stop here for a second and maybe pop up screen sharing and visit with our guests and allow folks to ask any questions they may have. I find this very fascinating. I want to say, as someone who does research myself, how much I appreciate you explaining your methodology and making it clear like where the data came from and these resource links. I think that's really important because one of the things I'll add before we start taking questions is that I see something every day. Someone says, oh, we're the top in the Southeast, we're the top in the South, we're the this, where we did more. And then wait, right? Are we have the same denominator? Are we looking at apples and oranges? Are we looking at different points in time? Are we looking at different teachers? Are we talking about teachers who were hired here or teachers who were hired there? So I really appreciate what you've done, because I think it allows us also to not only understand, but if we want to question the methodology, fine. But we need to know what it is. Heather Coons is here with us tonight. Heather's our communication director. Heather, I wanted to make sure did you have questions? And I know that, make sure if anybody wants to speak, just turn your camera on or turn your mic on and ask any questions you would like, make any comments you'd like, or you can put your comment, or question in chat, whatever makes you more comfortable right now. I hope everybody can hear me. I'm not quite sure. Sometimes you wonder, right? So one of the questions that I have, Kim and Derek, is when you show this information, you've been interviewed several times now, you've had a couple of articles published. What do people say? Are they surprised? Them?
Teachers aren't surprised. I think what I hear from teachers is they feel validated because they know the story that their bank accounts and their paychecks have have been telling, and they know that hasn't been reflected in the talking points of folks with power and positions with how they've portrayed it. The only folks that I've run across who have been surprised are the people who their only source of information has been those talking points from folks who just are not accurately reflecting what's happening.
Okay.
I thought that I thought that when we spoke to Jody McCreary from CBS, I wouldn't say that his response was surprise, but he seemed very interested in how far it went, and he asked detailed follow-up questions about what we could learn from what was shown in the graphs, and some of the things I said today were a repeat of the things I said to him then, because I figured if he was interested that other people would be too. But it's I think people respond to the idea that we're not investing in our children or the people who help them. And I think that a lot of people are having their children's experience this year specifically validated. I'm not the only person I know whose children have lost a couple of teachers this year. Things are really coming to a head, and again, I think one of the reasons is that there's not much light at the end of the tunnel for people who are trying to wait it out.
Heather, you have your hand up. You don't have to do that. Just turn your camera on and join in.
Hi there. I just want to add my thank you to both of you for sharing this, for creating this fabulous site and sharing it and getting it out there in the media too. So it's such good information. And Derek, I appreciated that you had the information about, well, both of you, but the effect on the teacher pipeline, and showing how the enrollments in the UNC system are going down and everything. It's just such long-term effects. I'm going to just have one question, then I'll ask another one later, but want to have other people have a chance to ask questions too. But it kind of piggybacks on Yvonne. I'm just thinking there are so many people, like you said, Kim, who just really don't get talking points across the spectrum and are surprised by this. Have you had people like politicians or anything? I'm imagining they're aware of this, and it's hard for them to refute all of the great data you have. I mean, they can go look at it. They can't argue their alternate points when this is so in their face. Do you feel like you're making inroads with some education-friendly politicians, or have you had some positive feedback in that regard?
I'll be honest. I've been sending this to the folks specifically who were on the House Appropriations Budget Committee for Education, as well as the Senate. And I'm just not really getting any response.
Nothing.
No.
I'm so disappointed.
I am meeting with someone tomorrow where it would be helpful, and I'm hopeful perhaps they are interested in moving the needle as much as I am, but no, there's and that's the thing too, is Derek and I have been working on this separately. I first crossed paths with Derek because I had my own salary schedules that I was tracking. And then, as Derek mentioned, they changed websites and all this data happened to disappear.
Yeah.
Before 2013. And someone told me, well, I think Derek Scott has it. So that was actually how Derek and I connected, was trying to find some of that data. So no, but no one has reached out to discuss it further personally. And frankly, that's why Derek and I are trying to be as descriptive as we can in the public setting. So that way, you know, people have, we're not trying to hide that information. It doesn't take just, you know, having a meeting and then we'll share it, because it's not about like who we get to meet with or anything like that. So all I can say is we have done our level best to put all this out in the public space, and we hope folks see it and that they're listening, even if they're not even really replying with thanks for the email, which
Right.
I've gotten a couple of those. And I think part of it, I don't know, we live in such a math phobic society, and I think as soon as there's numbers, people tend to get defensive. But if you're on the appropriations committee, I hope that that's not the reason either. So yeah, I can't speculate as to why. All I can say is that's why we're doing our level best to get it out there, so they don't even have to come to us. We are full transparency. Here's what we're doing. Here's our numbers. No secrets, no just
It's great.
infographic with a bogus claim. Like, we're done with that.
Yeah, it's great. And I think the value of your charts too, it shows you know, when you see a green line and then all the other lines below it, I mean, you don't have to know math to see that it's lower. And that's really powerful too. Yeah. And Derek, I wonder if that graphic you showed where the NC Republican Party said that they're raising teacher salaries faster than any other Southern state for the whatever, I forget what it was. I'm wondering if that is a reaction to some of the stuff that's coming out. You know, they're feeling defensive, as they should, obviously.
I'd love to take credit for that, but I've seen similar barrages of nearly identical tweets. Again, like I said, in 2014 and in 2018 and in 2020. So it's a recurring rhetorical strategy, and I believe this is a technically nonpartisan space. So, but I do want to relate what I think is an illustrative personal anecdote involving a gentleman who's no longer in office. I mentioned that I got started with this stuff in 2017, and the people probably remember class size chaos, and this is how my brain works. In my infinite naivete, I looked at some of the stuff on in the news about it, and then I went and I found the source data, because North Carolina's great about publishing source data for everything to do with schools. People complain about transparency in schools, and I don't understand it, because I've never had very much trouble finding budget, any kind of data I really wanted to get a hold of. And what I found was that, the discussion was, really discounting the presence of, the stimulus package that came through during the recession. And I prepared a spreadsheet, and again, infinite naivete, I emailed my state senator, who was at that time Chad Barefoot. And I didn't expect a response, not a personal one anyway. I got a personal response. His legislative assistant wanted to meet with me. Then turned out, no, we're going to have a phone call. So then I called the legislative assistant, and he tried to argue with the data, but I had done the work, and I was, this is how it went, and you can see that the it's been declining, and this is why, the allotment ratios were decreased, and that forced a decrease in the budget, and he said he would call me back and we would have another conversation, or that I would speak to Mr. Barefoot personally, and neither of those things occurred, but I did receive another email that essentially blew me off. Not impolitely. It just said that they would take my data. They had my spreadsheets, and they would give it due consideration. And it took me about a few months, and then I got a couple emails because now, since I'd sent him email, I was on his mail list, right? So I was getting the emails that he'd been sending all along, and it became depressingly clear to me that while they were talking to me, they had known everything that I had been telling them in graphic detail, that they had done it on purpose, that they thought it was good, and that rather than argue with me about it or even say what they actually thought about it to my face, they just wanted to lie to me and then go on with their business and keep lying to everyone else. And needless to say, that was, what's the word I'm looking for? Motivating. And so that's sort of been how I got involved doing this work.
Yeah, if I can follow up on that too, something similar in 2019, there was a senator who saw some of the graphs and everything. And instead of being like, oh, crap, like this isn't like what the narrative is that I've been saying. And despite like, you know, now being shown the light, the impulse has been to try to prove you wrong. And then when they can't prove you wrong, they blow you off. This person wanted to have a conversation with me when he called me on a Sunday to scream at me after I corrected all of his work, which I thought, again, in my infinite naivete, which I'm going to borrow Derek's line there, I thought I was helping him, but he didn't. It turns out he didn't want my help. They don't want this information to come to light, and as Derek said, it's motivating because it's stuff people need to know.
I wonder, Susan.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you both because I don't know if people realize this. This isn't your day job. You don't sit around collecting education data for a living. There are people who do that, quite honestly. You guys are not it. This is a side gig, a labor of love that you aren't really getting compensated for or anything like that.
We paid for the site.
Right, yeah, exactly. And I know perfectly well what that feels like. Yes. And I just wanted to thank you both for taking a lot of your personal time and labor for this project for us. And thank you both for doing that.
Thank you.
I totally agree, Susan. They're volunteers of the year, right? And this information is important. And to keep it kind of simple, you know, when I started looking at your graphs, I'm thinking we're just talking about what should be in business terms, kind of common sense. You adjust for inflation, right? You look at your labor force, you look at your own cost, whenever you're charging a product, right? You collect enough money to cover inflation.
No.
Right?
Mm-hmm. I will say,
if you're running a business, you kind of say, okay, like Kim said, we look at the international, the barometer they use 2%. That's what they're saying. We need to bring in enough revenue to cover this 2% prediction we have for inflation. So they adjust their tax rates, or there are other ways of collecting fees. That's how you run a good business. You sell your purses for more, your shoes, your haircuts, whatever. So what we're really talking about is what is kind of standard. To me, this is what struck me while looking at your work. Just kind of common sense. We're not going to fight over the percent raises we should or should not get and whatever. We're just saying, if you just take the salary that you promised us, okay, that has reasonable increments across time, and you control and increase it on an average rate of inflation, we will be okay.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that the maximum political contribution increases with inflation like clockwork every year. Every budget, the folks who release it for several budgets in a row, they've been proud to announce that they were coming in inside of adjustment for population and inflation. They're aware of inflation, and it's not a mystery. Inflation is in other contexts used as a political cudgel. But the effect it has on real people. Kim uses the basket, you know, of, you know, what is your money buy, and political memories are short, but teacher pay in particular speaks to people a lot deeper, I think. I remember when I was in high school, grew up in a small town in Indiana, and the high school teachers and administrators were pillars in the community. They were at events. You saw them at the golf course. They lived in the nicer parts of town because they could afford houses there. There were, especially if there were a married couple of teachers. And I look around where I live now, and I remember when people were my age. I remember when their kids were my kids' age, and I remember the struggles that they had, and I remember the struggles that they, more to the point, did not have. And I look around now and I see what the teachers that my kids have are going through, and it's not comparable. And it's not because Indiana was some, spendthrift paradise of showering money on public education. It's just, I mean, and that's the other thing. To the extent that I've looked at places outside of North Carolina has done very poorly, especially since the Great Recession. But nationally, it's a crisis, and especially in the South. The comparisons to the Southeast are classic, but especially until quite recently, I don't necessarily think of Mississippi, Alabama, Florida as necessarily having it all together. But at the same time, Alabama cranked out a 21% raise. Eventually it gets to people, and it goes beyond politics. And it would be wonderful to me if we could not have to get to this level of dissatisfaction that the people of Alabama got to before we do something about it.
Yes, I want to stop for a second. Any of our guests tonight, if you have a question, please unmute yourself, speak up, ask your question, put it in chat. And of course, we are going to be sending a follow-up email, and we'll have all the resources that Derek talked about on that slide available. We also will be posting this presentation on YouTube in a few days, and I encourage you to go see it. I encourage you to share it with your friends. We know it's busy time now. We just had spring break. People are back. They're busy. We have, lots of things going on in these last few months of school. But this is critical. And one of the things I encourage you to do is to think about this as you think about who you vote for, who your representative is, call your representative tomorrow. Say, I saw this workshop. I find it fascinating. Have you seen it? When you get your link showing the YouTube presentation, please share that link with your neighbors, with your legislators, because we really need some accountability and someone to kind of answer this question. Don't we all deserve to have, this kind of a model in place as a minimal kind of thing? Anyone else? Any other questions? I think that, it's later, we're getting into the evening time. It's getting a little late, so I don't want to belabor it. Heather, I want to make sure you and Susan don't have anything else. Well, one of the things that I know, and I will say in closing from Public Schools First NC, we are data hounds. We love information, and we like it to be fair and unbiased. We like for people to be able to see where the data came from and how it's being used and interpreted. That's one thing that I'm with Kim on. I don't like memes sometimes because they don't have any context. Fastest raising, is that compared to a percentage of X to Y over this year, that year, what year? I'm sure you can figure out a way to call it fastest, then just tell us how you did that, on what is your criteria for saying that. So that's what we care about. Derek, I've long respected your research skills and the things that you've done, and I really appreciate you helping. And Kim, you are, I would love to go back and be in your class. I think that your analytical approach to your subject and how you've used your knowledge in this area to tackle something critical right now, which is our teacher salary pay and our professionalism needs. Thank you so very much. And in closing, I want to just tell everybody a couple things. I'm going to, I don't know, Kim, if we can get our slideshow back up for a second, but if we can't, don't worry about it. But I just wanted to share with folks that, okay, we'll go back to towards the end there. Hold on, folks. I want to just show you a few things real fast. We have a really special program coming up on May the 31st. It's going to be with Congressman Wiley Nickel and North Carolina Senator Rachel Hunt. And we're asking them to kind of talk about some of these things, some of these challenges. I invite you to all find this event on Facebook. We have a very, it's a ticketed event, but we have extremely low prices for teachers and educators. And I hope that you'll join us. Then lastly, I'll say, because if I don't say this, my crew will get mad at me. Follow us. Look, we're on Facebook. If you showed that slide, Kim, we encourage you to get our newsletter. We send a newsletter out every week. We're going to have a lot of this information in our newsletter for a long time, all during this budget cycle, because I can't think of anything more important than understanding the impact that we've made by not allowing teachers to keep up with inflation and not allowing them to keep up with the expectations of their salary schedule. And we see the impacts that we're having on the teacher pipeline. There are folks that are very concerned about the efforts to deprofessionalize the teaching profession. And certainly a quick way to do it is not reward them for advanced training and advanced degrees, and not reward them with decent benefits, and not reward them with decent pay. This is a quick way to do it. And while Derek mentioned, and we have a lot of laterals transferring in, thank goodness, right? We need the help. But these are folks who have not picked education as their primary profession. They did not go to the School of Education. They were not certified teachers. They certainly can earn that and work towards that. We hope they will. But, we're doing that because we have so badly damaged the pipeline. So we can fix that. And then, of course, Heather, I'm getting ready to hang up, but you raised your hand. What did I
did raise my hand because you reminded me of something that came in my head when Derek was talking about the teacher pipeline. The lateral entry teachers have a higher attrition rate. And so to Kim's point, you want the educated, committed, well-trained, invested teachers who are going to be there for the long haul. So you might have those lateral entry and they're going to push the numbers on the DPI website, but it's not looking really long-term. So
And
we have to remember that.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, Heather, because I actually have something this has been capturing my attention, trying to get this message out. But when they were talking about that attrition data, they actually bury the traditionally prepared teachers in with others. So at the state board meeting, they were talking all about how the lateral entry teachers have the lowest attrition rate. Well, I work with a bunch of math teachers and had them double check. And no, the traditionally prepared teacher, their attrition rate is half of that. And why don't they want to tell that story? Why aren't they trying to lift up our traditionally prepared teachers? And that's where, it gets hard to just attribute everything to ignorance when there just seem to be way too many coincidences that point to malice instead.
Yeah. I had seen a report last year where there was a big difference between the traditional and lateral entry. And so that's a good point about burying the data.
Go ahead and sign us off. And good night, friends. I appreciate you coming. Kim and Derek, hang on. We'll have a little bit of conversation. We're going to stop the recording now. And